Hello, everyone. Welcome to another installment of Open Air presented by the Harvey B. Gantt Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm Dexter Wimberly, and I'm very happy to introduce today's guest. Tajh Rust is a visual artist based in New York. He received his MFA from Yale in 2019 and BFA from Cooper Union in 2011. His recent solo exhibitions include Reflections at Palm Springs Art Museum in 2023 and Somewhere in Between at Matthew Brown in Los Angeles in 2022. Tajh Rust uses portraiture to engage with questions of representation and visibility. The medium of painting allows Rust to combine different references into a single composition, whether the source material is based on photography or drawing. In his artist statement, Rust says, the work explores the subject's relationships to space, whether interior and domestic or exterior and public. Somehow the works all feel intimate and vulnerable. Several of the paintings incorporate water as a motif. Bodies of water, specifically the Atlantic Ocean, bridge the diaspora together. Tajh Rust is also included in the upcoming exhibition, Becoming the Sea, Black Rock Senegal times Harvey B. Gantt Center, that opens on August 9th. The exhibition highlights 12 artists who participated in the first 2 years of the Black Rock residency in Senegal. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Tajh Rust.
Hello.
Hey, Tajh, how are you?
Good. How are you doing, Dexter?
Good, good. Um, it strikes me from knowing you, you're a little bit of the quiet type, so I'm going to be pulling a lot out of you today, right? So the
Okay.
first thing I want to ask you is, where are you in the world right now? Are you at home? Are you in your studio? Where are you located?
I'm at home. I live in Queens, New York. Um, yeah, I'm at home at the moment.
Cool, cool. And so I gave a little bit of a background on you and your work, just kind of pulled some stuff out of your artist statement and bio. But I'm sure when you meet people and you discuss your work, you have a different way of kind of like talking about it, perhaps more casually. But maybe you could just take a moment and just so we can hear directly from you, like how do you describe the work that you make and what you do as an artist?
Well, I think I'm interested in representation as a question. Uh, that usually takes the form of portraiture. Most of my work is, environmental portraits of, oil on canvas. But I'm always thinking about uh, representation overall. So sometimes the works take the form of abstractions. Um, there's a flag that I made years ago that is just as representational, I feel, as the portraits. Where I'm thinking about people, the diaspora at large, and histories that are both shared and unique.
So the word diaspora has come up a couple times. I mentioned it in your bio. You just mentioned it. So what is the relevance of the diaspora to you? And I'll just kind of like maybe lead the question a little bit more, like as a black man, like what does that even mean to you? Like why is that important?
Well, for me, it there's like an immediacy because I'm a first generation American, and my parents, they somehow met each other, even though they came from different parts of the world as well, and here I am. So I think that a lot of people can relate to that, that movement, that history. That's not always so um, predictable. Um, my father's from the Caribbean. My mom was born in the UK, and they met here in New York. And New York is a unique place in that it brings a lot of people from all over together, and I'm a product of that. So the diaspora is has an immediacy to me. It's like how I came to be, and it kind of opened up my interest and curiosity about traveling and meeting people from other places and experiences.
Thank you. So obviously, there are a lot of artists in the world, certainly a lot of painters. And within the subset of painters, there are a lot of painters that engage with portraiture in the figure, right? So given that, like, what is it that you're trying to say with painting or say with portraiture that you think is sort of like I don't want to use the word unique because that's not really like so relevant, but that's important to you. Like, what are you trying to say? It's not about like uniqueness, but what are you trying to say that's important to you?
Well, I guess I'm trying to uh, highlight intimate moments and kind of give them space to I guess take up more space. There's so many things that often go overlooked, as simple as just like a connection between two people or a group of people, or just how someone occupies a space or the spaces we find ourselves or create for ourselves. Um, and, you know, like identity kind of not being confined to the body, but being an extension, that can extend beyond the body, can extend into your context, whether that's where you are or who you're around. So I guess I try to I try to give space to those quiet moments, the mundane, elevate them to a place where we get to spend more time with that, with those moments. And painting is kind of ideal for that because it's still, like so, we live in a world that is moving so rapidly, and I like painting because it kind of makes you sit still for a bit, and you can spend time or like revisit a painting again and again and find something new. So I guess as a painter, I start more as a fan of painting, a fan of art, visual art first, and I try to create similar experiences that I find joy in for my audience.
And you mentioned, the subjects and sort of being still looking at a painting, but how do you actually go about selecting the individuals that you put in your work? Are you painting relatives? Are you painting friends? Are you out scouting for people? Are you using source materials? Can you kind of like explain what that creative process is like for you?
Yeah, it varies. I think in the beginning, it was mostly just people I knew, um, whether it's friends or family, people who I just happened to meet and wanted to get to know better or become friends with. And, the paintings or the work kind of became a foundation for those relationships, for those friendships. But in recent years, and I think we'll talk about that with specific paintings. I've had to shift gears, both out of necessity and just out of just like natural progression. So I give myself more license to I guess create characters now. Not all of the figures that I paint are actual people anymore. So it's been interesting to kind of like oscillate between the observed and the imagined, and sometimes these things exist in a single painting. So uh, yeah, it's been interesting, the trajectory.
You mentioned intimacy and vulnerability in your statement, and I think you also mentioned it directly maybe a few moments ago. And I just kind of want to unpack that a little bit because, in terms of intimacy, I think it's quite clear how that can be expressed in a painting, especially when it's in sole figure and they're in an interior environment alone. But in terms of the vulnerability component of that, can you talk a little bit more about like why intimacy and vulnerability are two aspects that are of interest to you to explore in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think those things they kind of speak to emotions, and I think those are the emotions that speak to me the most, or at least they speak to emotions. They're not actually emotions, but um, yeah, I think that what I look for is to kind of communicate beyond just what's apparent or obvious. So, through the use of color, through the use of gesture, how what these figures are doing, um, their body language, for instance, can communicate a lot. Because painting, we don't get to speak with them like the way we're speaking, to each other. So I have to communicate a little bit more and kind of give the viewer an entry point. And there's so much figurative art, both historically and contemporarily. So to distinguish myself, it's like what when I look at a figurative painting, like what holds my attention, what paintings kind of sustain themselves over hundreds of years. And I think emotion kind of like breaks through whatever um, the contemporary moment, that generated the painting, is. These things come and go, but I think one thing we can all connect to is emotions.
And water is something that's come up a few times in terms of a theme or something that is of interest to you, particularly the Atlantic Ocean, but like water in general. Why water? Why is water sort of, pardon the pun, surface? That's something that's important to you.
Uh, it's interesting. I think because of the depth. I mean, not to be, you know, not to use another pun, but I think that water as a motif, as a symbol, as a presence, kind of can communicate so much. Again, talk about like how my parents met, and just kind of the trajectory of how a lot of us arrive at where we are in the Black diaspora, wherever that may be, because it's ever evolving and changing and moving, so and spreading. So I think water is one thing we can all kind of look to um, talk about a common ancestry, a shared mobility. But water, the ocean, I should say, it's. I mean, it's fun to paint, just like on a aesthetic level, um, and yeah, I think it holds a lot of meaning. It holds a lot of meaning, and the meaning is fluid. Another point. I'm sorry, but yeah, I think that yeah, it's something that I'm still working through. I think I started prioritizing water as a motif after I read Homegoing. I think that's where it started, and by Yagyasi. And there's a part of the book where she talks about the mysteries of the depths of the ocean, but also what like the certainty of what lies at the bottom. And I felt like that was like such a evocative way to express um, just kind of the journey that we all take to be where we are. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, I get that. And so I'm gonna switch gears a little bit. And so you went to Cooper and Yale, and I want to sort of understand like what would you say is like the biggest difference between what you, I wouldn't say learned at those institutions and what you're probably putting into practice. It's probably too broad of a question, but I'm pretty certain that you left, higher ed with some specific sort of like thoughts about what being an artist would be like. And then there's some realities of what it means to actually like a working artist in the world. I mean, can you talk about like maybe one or two of the biggest like differences between what you thought, what you thought it would be like being a full-time artist versus like the realities?
Yeah, I think, I mean, yeah, school is very different from being a practicing artist. That's one thing, but I do think I was well prepared for all the challenges that I might face. I think Cooper, when I was there, I was so young that I just wanted to be a student. I was a sponge. I was soaking up, all the information that I could. I was taking classes in every medium I could think of. I was doing a lot of film work back then, video, uh, and that's kind of helped me with the paintings, because I kind of learned all of those things at the same time. But I've stuck with painting the most consistently. But yeah, school, like Cooper was great because I got to really practice talking about art, which doesn't come naturally. Like there's such a rich history, and there's so many like ideas bouncing around even today, amongst so many different types of artists. But you get to really hone your language, you get to critique each other, develop our language So that was very helpful for me, especially when you're trying to like come up with ideas. It's like, okay, why am I doing this? You kind of like can define it for yourself. Um, when I went, by the time I got to Yale, I was a little bit older because I took some time in between. So I really wanted to use that time to kind of develop a studio practice and give myself at least 2 years to just like focus on art solely. So that was great too because you're around talented individuals. The professors there, they're all like professional artists, so you get to learn like best practices from different people and kind of just take like what makes the most sense for the way that you work. So yeah, I mean, it all funnels into what you kind of create for yourself as a professional. Um, so I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, yeah, it's school is great as prep, but it's actually doing it is presents its own challenges.
Yeah, no, that does answer my question. I mean, I think that that's like a pretty like common sort of reality to know that it's very different once you like get into the quote unquote real world. But as you've been building your career, what are some of the challenges you've been facing? I mean, maybe creatively, are there any creative challenges that you've been trying to like work through that you can discuss? I mean, because obviously, like being a painter, for example, like differentiating yourself from other painters, and also just like having your own voice.
Yeah, I think that is a challenge because I do think that sometimes when you might arrive at an idea that you think is really exciting, and then like you'll see something that's very similar to it almost immediately. Like the the exposure and access we have to images is at times overwhelming for me personally because I don't want to be too influenced by people who work in a similar vein. But you also want to be aware. You want to be aware of what the conversations are. You want to be in conversation with contemporary concerns and matters. So it's just, I guess, navigating that, like being informed but not being too influenced. I think that's the main thing. But yeah, I just pull from my personal experience and my interests. Uh, like again, like the people in my paintings are like populated by people in my life, and just like ideas that I sketched down. And if there are similarities, that can be cool too to other artists because that means that there is a common interest. There's a common like um, I don't know. There's something that draws us to this thing that needs to be shared. So uh, I don't get too down about being unique because ultimately, like we're participating in a history that's so old and so long that you know you're gonna find something, and that's actually what's encouraging at times. Like some ideas really sustain themselves over centuries. So I try to I try to think about that, keep that in consideration.
Thanks. Do you think that and I'm going back to water here for a moment, but do you think that your interest in water has anything to do with what you mentioned earlier about the diaspora and sort of how your parents met and sort of travel and sort of like this cultural exchange?
Yeah, I think so. Um, yeah, it's interesting because like I come from a Caribbean family, so like islands, like water is like a part of the lifestyle. Being surrounded by water, honestly. And then like being in New York too, it's made up of a bunch of islands. So I find myself kind of like navigating those spaces, and yeah, I think water, as a motif in the work, um, it can be literal. I can literally paint the ocean, which I have done, but sometimes I use it as a psychological space. Like water can kind of seep into interior spaces. Like flooding has affected a lot of people. And that's a part of a history too. So like water can kind of like bring meaning from I guess one body to another. You know, like one body of water to another can create different bodies of water. So um, and it's fluid and you know all the obvious things, but uh, I think you know just from the things I was reading and then of course going to Black Rock, where so much of like so much of what happens in Dakar is you know takes place on the water. Um, yeah, I think it was something I was thinking about a lot right after I got out of school.
So a couple of things. We have some images of work that we're going to get to as soon as it's prepped on screen. But in the meantime, I have one more question before we talk about actual paintings. So you and I both happen to be sitting in front of books. So
Yeah.
I assume yours is real and also not a virtual background. But so, with that said, I mean, I'm assuming, and you've referenced a couple of books already, that
Yeah.
reading and literature do have sort of an influence on your life as an artist. Are there any publications, books that you've read, either recently or just historically in your life that have had a profound impact on you?
Yeah, I cited Homegoing. I think that one, just because it spans so much time and space, you know, I thought it was really um, just amazing. And I think I returned to a lot of the sentiments in that book a lot. Um, yeah, I'm currently reading Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments by Sadia Hartman. And it's been interesting reading that because of how she approaches writing. She works from like a research, like she works based on research and imagery. So like the book, like it has a bunch of photographs in it, and she's basically writing. Um, she's creating narratives around the photographs, and that's similar to what I do. Like I'm not going to compare myself to Dia Hartman, but I do try to. Um, I use a lot of reference imagery. Sometimes, you know, from found photographs as well. So, uh, yeah, creating kind of compositions from source imagery um, has been interesting. Seeing a writer approach that same thing.
Thank you. So let's see if we can get the first image up so we can talk about some specific works. So what we'll do, since we have 8 images, what we'll do is maybe you can just give a little bit of background. I mean, the title is there, so that's great, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about the work, and then I'll ask you a few specific questions.
Yeah. So these, I guess, the first two works that we'll talk about are from a series of paintings that I did titled "In and Of." So the prompt of the body of work was I would ask each person to identify a place that had a personal significance to them, and they would identify the place, and then I'd photograph them there. And I was thinking of these spaces as extensions of themselves. So the portrait wasn't just limited to their bodies, but you know, these spaces became extensions of themselves. And you know, it was a project to kind of like get me, you know, into possibly going to grad school. Um, it's a collaborative project, so I share authorship with the artists or with the people. So in this case, this is an artist named Osaratin. He's a painter and photographer from Nigeria, and this is him in his bedroom studio. And yeah, so this was kind of like the first time I worked in that way, and it's a series I continued for a while.
And just so I'm clear about how this was created, is this based on a photograph? Was this live painting? Like, can you talk about like the specifics?
Yeah, so usually I shoot a bunch of photographs, and then I kind of piece them together in the process of the painting. So I try to take the things that are most interesting to me and compose them into a single image. So I spent you know a good amount of time with Osaratin that day, and you know, we arrived at this composition.
Let's get to the next image.
Yeah. So again, this is part of that same series. In this case, it's a painting of my friend Adrian at a restaurant that actually no longer exists. So this was one of her favorite restaurants. It was called Madiba at in Brooklyn. It was a South African restaurant. So it's interesting, like looking back at this series because it's also a marker in time. Like some of these spaces don't even exist anymore, but at the time it was very important to her. So yeah, similar approach. She identified the space, and then I tried to represent her in that space.
What are your sort of thoughts around color and your choice of color? Are you painting color as it exists, or are you actually taking liberties and introducing other colors into the work?
Yeah, in this case, it's a little bit of both. Yeah, there's a lot of information in this painting that's not painted in, so I kind of like try to leave some room for improvisation while I'm painting. In these first two works, I'm working from photography, but I try to make the painting its own thing. So again, like you may not see the seams in this work, but this is also made from a series of photographs because the pose. I like the way she posed in this in one particular photo, but then her expression in another photo. So it's like people wouldn't know that just by looking at it, but there are a lot of decisions that go into the final piece.
So it's more of a composite of a variety of different things.
Right. Yeah.
Let's go to the next image. Maybe I think it's a more recent work, slightly more recent, sort of around the same time. Around the same
Mhm.
time.
Yeah.
So,
So this
so this is
painting,
quite different. Yeah.
yeah, it's different because I was working from source material that wasn't my own. So this painting was done from one of my favorite films, To Sleep with Anger by Charles Burnett, and it's a painting I did while I was in school, in grad school. And the reason I wanted to look towards film is because I wanted to think of different ways to compose bodies in a frame. I think film has like an interesting history that's separate from painting. I think painting, its history is so long, and there's a way to like paint, portraits. But I think film, bodies take up the frame in different ways. So this painting was done by combining different frames of a tracking shot, like a panning shot that starts at the lamp on the right and ends with the man's face on the left. So I kind of like pieced together these stills and created this composition. And I embellished a few things too. But Charles Burnett is one of my favorite filmmakers. He inspired like a lot of what I was thinking about when I was in grad school. Um, and yeah, I mean, he's a great artist.
Is that something you still do? I mean, this was made back in 2018, so this is at this point, sorry, like 6 years ago. Do you still find
Not
like the same kind of inspiration with film and same approach?
I do, but not in such a direct way. I watch a lot of films. I do have a background in filmmaking. I did study film at Cooper as well, but I look to film more just to for inspiration, not necessarily as a reference image. Um, I just try to think about ways that um, actors, embody the frames and the spaces in film, and I try to like reimagine certain compositions, I guess, based on things that catch my eye. But yeah, I haven't really made a one-to-one kind of painting from a film because that gets into some dicey waters in terms of like authorship and things like that.
Right, right. You strike me as someone who probably watches their favorite film pretty frequently, like over and over again.
Yeah,
Um,
I return to a few things. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Let's go to image number 4.
Yeah,
So yeah, so this is obviously a bit of a departure.
it is. Yeah, so this painting was done based on my time at Black Rock. So I went to Senegal a few months after I graduated from Yale, and it was great to kind of jump into something so soon after, and something as unique and special as Black Rock because um, it gave me a chance to. I mean, honestly, it just like it represents so much for me as an experience. It was my first time in Africa, and I was part of the first cohort for Black Rock. So there was kind of like this raw like excitement and anticipation on what the residency could be. And this painting was based on my final day there. I kind of just like did one more lap around the city, and there were these boys at the beach, and they were posing. So I I took a photograph and made this painting. But yeah, this kind of speaks to like the presence of water that pops up in a few of my other works. I don't know if it's gonna pop up in this slideshow, but yeah, this was a fun painting to make.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about your time at Black Rock and also the upcoming show at the Gantt Center before we're wrapping up today as well. But just so we can get through the remaining images with a few more. Well, let's go to the next image,
Yeah. So yeah, I can just jump right in and talk about this one.
please, if you don't mind. Yes.
Yeah. So this painting was kind of uh, in a lot of ways a monumental painting for me because it happened at such a fraught time for a lot of us. So I made this painting a few months into the pandemic, and it was kind of a combination of all the ideas I had at the time. As we saw with the previous images, I worked a lot from photography. A lot of the paintings were done from photos I had taken myself, and because that time I had to be isolated more than I would have liked. I had to kind of find new ways to work, and this was born out of that. So I just returned to my sketchbooks and looked at all these sketches that I'd had and tried to compose them into a painting that kind of represented everything that I was feeling or everything I was interested in at the time. Um, so yeah, there's a lot going on, but yeah, I was like, if I could only make one more painting, like I'm gonna take my time and make one that I feel strongly about. So that's what this painting represents for me.
But who are the figures in this work?
It's just a family. I think I was missing my family. I hadn't seen them in several months. So uh, I guess yeah, the title comes out of that. Someday, it's like someday we'll get back together. Sit around the table and share space. So yeah, the painting in the background was a painting I made um, several years before that. It's kind of a painting that uh, talks about the diaspora in an abstract way. Like the center of that painting is black, and then the margins is white, and like in between there's like a gradient of skin tones. And I'm just thinking about like the movement of people over time. But yeah, you got the panther underneath. There were a lot of like protests happening around that time. There's just like so many references and so many like little Easter eggs in this painting. But yeah, it was like a labor of love. It was kind of just like uh, yeah, it was just everything that I was feeling and thinking about at the time in one painting.
It's interesting you mentioned the Panther. I was going to actually ask you about that, so I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, the
Hmm.
color choices in this painting are interesting to me because it's something about the color choices makes this painting feels like a work from the 70s for some reason.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
can't exactly like put my finger on exactly why, but it
Okay.
feels like in many ways, like better way. I don't know. There's probably a better way to put this, but it feels like black art from the '70s for some reason. And maybe it has to do with the color ways. Maybe it is the subtlety of that Black Panther that sort of like maybe playing tricks on my mind. Maybe
Mhm.
it's the the juxtaposition of the figures, or sort of like the way you're dealing with perspective with the kitchen kind of coming into the space. But what size is this actual work?
I believe it's 6 feet tall and 8 feet wide. So it's fairly large.
Okay,
It's
so
like,
when you say
yeah,
monumental, yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah. It's
you
approaching
do
that.
mean
Yeah,
monumental. Yeah.
yeah,
No, so yeah, so the figures are almost like, I mean, they're not quite life size, but it's pretty large, pretty close to human scale. Was
yeah.
this a bit of a departure from you for you, or did this sort of open up a new way of thinking about like the kind of paintings you wanted to make? Because obviously you did this during the pandemic. It was a response to what you were feeling emotionally. Was it sort of like one and done, like I needed to get this out, or did this sort of open up some new ideas for you?
I think yes. It's hard to replicate something like this because of everything that kind of went into it. But it did, yeah, it did. It kind of inform the way I work now. So just the like license to imagine a lot more, and not rely like too much on photography, but to kind of like create situations and compositions, um, just based on what I want to see, the figures doing in the painting. Um, so and just not, yeah, I kind of moved away from relying on photography. But it's fun to kind of go back and forth. I do still love, traditional portraiture and like getting a likeness, getting, making a painting that looks like somebody, I know, somebody real. But uh, this was kind of like, um, a necessary change in the way that I worked that was born out of isolation, but now I still apply to the new works.
And one more question about this before we go on to the next one, because I do think that the like the insertion of the Black Panther, which might fly over some people's heads, is like, oh, that's an odd rug. Like, like, or is that, or is that a bear? Like we're thinking about that.
Mhm.
But that also makes me sort of think about like whether or not inserting like messages or even sort of political ideas is something that you do frequently in your work, or is that important to you? Is it irrelevant? Sort of like, is it just kind of spontaneous?
Yeah, it's I when I feel compelled to do it, I'll do it. I I don't try to like shoehorn it into anything. I felt like it was appropriate for this, just because of like all the activity and that was going on at the time. Uh, yeah, I pick my spots because I don't want to dwell too much in kind of these like fraught relationships we have with you know politics or social issues. But I do think it's important to kind of speak on things, if you can at the moment. And you know again, like these paintings kind of outlive us, so if I do like leave behind anything, I do want it to like mean something and say something when possible.
Yeah, nothing wrong with a little mystery too. We have a
Yeah.
couple more images. Let's go to the next.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much here, so I'll let you give us the overview. I have a lot of questions.
Okay. I mean, I might just like, give too much away by describing this, but like this is based on a photo of my mom. It's not quite my mom, and it's not like quite the like actual photo, but yeah, this was just like an old like family photograph that I embellished and changed to make this painting. But yeah, I mean that's pretty much it. Again, it's like not being too faithful to the photographs, but kind of like taking what I find interesting from the photographs and then like moving things around to make it into an interesting painting.
Yeah, well, there's so many things about this image, this painting that kind of sparks some memories from my own childhood, and I have found that to be quite interesting with not obviously not every artist I speak to, not even every artist of color that I speak with, but with a lot of artists who are painting like images of their parents or like that generation from like the 60s or 70s. And I look at those images and I'm like, wow, that looks just like looks just like there's like these little things, and in particular the plastic on the sofa, right? Which is sort
Yeah,
of like one of those like things that when you see it, if you've ever grew up in a household that had that or had an aunt that had that, you immediately like what around about what year that must have been, like
yeah,
what kind of like what that person's background. They're either from the south or they're from the Caribbean. Like very like
yeah,
little. I guess you could call them tropes, for lack of
right.
a better word.
Hmm.
But that like the expression on her face, the clothing that she's wearing. I mean, I swear I have a photo of an aunt of mine that just like looks just like this image. Uh,
Yeah.
have you had those kind of conversations with people about those commonalities?
Yeah, this I included this painting because for some reason, like people always have a lot to say about it. I do think there's kind of like there is a time period where like everyone can relate to an image like this if you're like from a certain background. So, and I think that's what attracted me to like this idea in the first place. Like I've seen this like the photo that it was inspired by so many times, but you know, when I think about like what to paint, it's not just about like, oh, I have all these family photos at my disposal. Let me just like paint all my family photos. It's about like what's happening, what can I communicate emotionally or like culturally through it. So yeah, this was a. I mean, it spoke to me for one reason, but I'm always interested to hear like what other people, like see in the work.
And also, can you talk a little bit about the doll that she's holding? I mean, in the
Yeah,
sense of like, obviously the younger person, but not so young that you would think they would have a doll. So then, like,
right. Hmm.
what's happening there?
I mean, I don't have a specific narrative. The doll was in the photo. Um, I just found it interesting, just the parallel between this black young woman and this like Cabbage Patch doll of like a blue eyed, blonde haired, doll. And that just opens up all these other questions and references, like the doll study and things like that, and ideals of beauty and what kids are conditioned to be attracted to at a young age. So yeah, I don't know. It was just I think that's what made it kind of interesting because you have this kind of straightforward portrait of a woman of in a specific time period, but then you have like this doll that also like opens up like other questions.
Right, right. No, that's very true. Um, so in the interest of time, let's go to the next image. Yeah, so same thing. Give us a little bit of background. I have a few questions.
Yeah, well, this painting, is pretty recent. I've completed it a few months ago. Again, just pulling from, you know, some of the photographs I took in Dakar, uh, and combining them into a composition that I find interesting. It's interesting. Some of these images are actually from videos that I took. So again, like going back to that Charles Burnett painting of like taking a film and like pausing it in certain instances and making a painting from that. Like my background in film or just like my travels. Like I'll take videos at times and then just revisiting some of the videos that I record. You can kind of like isolate moments uh, in those, and I guess that's where like the movement comes from. Like there were these boys playing with like a tennis ball on the beach, playing like soccer or like like just kicking it around. So like you can get like a lot of movement and motion by using video as a source material too.
And for many of the works that we've looked at, I mean, the perspective of the from the perspective of the viewer, it's I mean, voyeuristic might not be the right word, but it's this idea that, with the exception of the earlier works where you had people in their space where they were clearly, engaging
Mm.
with you, looking at you. Most of the other works are sort of like very sort of bird's eye view, voyeuristic, kind of like you're just kind of like peeking in on something that's happening. Um, is that important to you to sort of like there's a lot of portraiture out there that's very very confrontational. Let's just say that.
Yeah, yeah. I
And the whole
think
idea is the gaze, right? Like
right.
the subject is giving you the eye. Yeah.
Hmm. No, I think that's a great question because
Now go ahead.
it's sorry. I was just saying I think that's a great question because uh, one of the things I was kind of like challenged to think about more when I was in grad school was this idea of like idealism or like the pose, and like kind of like this um, avatar that portraiture can kind of like come across as that where we like put our best self, we present our best self. So you kind of get into this tradition of these very statuesque, iconographic paintings where it's just a figure posed in front of the viewer, and it's something that I've been thinking about more because I don't want all my paintings to feel that way. I think it's appropriate at times um, because sometimes sometimes you want to see there's a beautiful image and you want to present somebody in a positive way. But I think as the things that I'm working through right now, I'm trying to think of other ways to enter a painting, and I'm considering more about like what's happening, in the rectangle rather than just like this straightforward pose. So that's kind of what this painting came out of. I was doing a lot of single figure paintings for a long time, and I wanted to get more people involved. I wanted to, have more action and dynamism in the work. So that's kind of what I'm working through right now.
No, thank you for expanding on that. I mean, I do totally understand your perspective, and I think so many images you if you point a camera at someone, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, you point a camera at someone in in a professional setting for sure. And this is like the classic art world pose where everyone has their arms crossed, which to me, I'm just
Yeah,
sort of like, you know, I consciously try not to cross my arms anymore. When someone's like, oh, I want to do a photo of you, I'm like, I gotta find something else to do with my arms, and it's not always easy to know what to do.
yeah,
Um, right? And that's because that is supposed to like evoke a certain seriousness, earnestness, etc. It's like the classic business pose. And any gallerist, you look on like these websites, and every gallerist is posing like this. Anyway, I
definitely.
digress. Let's go to the next image, so we can wrap up the image portion of our conversation. So this is the final image, and so please share what you can.
Yeah, this is the most recent painting, Not Without Laughter. The title actually comes from Langston Hughes' first novel. And yeah, I was just thinking about, like, I guess, family and in this case, fatherhood, and like the challenges of that. But kind of, being able to laugh through some of those challenges, and that goes for anything, like not just like parenting or family dynamics, but just like kind of being able to find humor and joy in challenging times as well. Um, and there are like a few books in the background that kind of speak to different kinds of families. And yeah, I was just thinking about like all the different iterations of family, and yeah, that's what this painting's about.
Is this someone you know, or is this just a composite of different images?
Yeah, no, it's a composite. So yeah, some of it's from like found photographs. So sometimes when I travel, I'll go into thrift shops. Actually, it's something I've been doing recently. And in certain thrift shops, you'll see just regular photos that people have kind of discarded or donated. And so I guess elements of this painting come from that. Some of them are painted from life, like the books are painted from life. Like those are just like my books lying around. Um, yeah, like some of these things are imagined and just put into this painting. Like all the colors kind of imagined, but yeah, it's from a variety of different sources, which is kind of how I work now. I never really adhere to one source, kind of just combine different things.
And can you talk about your color choices? I mean, obviously, you've had to take some liberties in terms of deciding what colors to use in this work. And what's the palette mean to you? Like the orange, the green, like where are these colors coming from?
Well, I wanted to create a sense of warmth. I find myself actually going back to like these yellow, gold, orange like colors a lot because I do think they make me the most happy. I don't know if everyone else feels that way, but yeah, if I'm trying to communicate a sense of like warmth, I'll start with those colors, and then from there, it's like what complements it, what creates like interesting relationships. Uh, so yeah, it's kind of it's improvisational and it's kind of trial and error. Like sometimes I'll make paintings that are actually pretty garish because I'm trying out like different color combinations that don't quite work. But I felt like this one was kind of a nice blend of different colors that I guess evoke different emotions as well.
And so we're coming down to was probably for us like the final few minutes or so. So that was the final image for the presentation. This work will actually be part of the upcoming exhibition at the Harvey B. Gantt Center, Becoming the Sea. So that exhibition highlights artists that were in the first 2 years of Black Rock residency, and you mentioned the residency. If you can talk a little bit more about your experience in Senegal. I mean, I've never been, and I would love to kind of hear a little bit more about what like what that was like for you as an artist.
It was amazing. Yeah, Dakar is like such an interesting city. There's so much culture there. Um, we got to really connect with a lot of the resources and institutions out there. We saw screenings by filmmakers. We got to meet filmmakers, that travel between Dakar and France and the museums there, and seeing dance performances just by like people, just like regular people. Like there's a dance called the Sabar, and like people get together every now and then and perform it. Just like one night, and people from all over the city come there and do their version of it. So like there's a lot of experiences that stay with me, and they kind of like these things kind of creep into my work over time. I'm always going back to the photos I took there, or like the things I remember, and try to apply it to what I'm doing. But yeah, I recommend. I mean, it's the only African city I've ever been to. I would like to travel more throughout the continent, but I think Dakar was a great place to start because you get to see like a lot of the rich culture there now. But then you also have like historical sites like Ngor Island, where you have like the door of no return, which is like a big, like there was like a big slave house, which was kind of like a last stop for a lot of African slaves before they were like transferred to other parts of the world. So yeah, it's got a little bit of everything, but it was just cool to see everybody just like living their life unbothered and just enjoying the beach, which is a big part of that city too. So yeah, it was a formative experience for me, and yeah, I'm really excited to see the exhibition. I got to meet a lot of great artists through it as well.
So we're down to final couple minutes. What are you working on now? I mean, I mentioned a couple of your solo exhibitions that took place over the past couple of years, but what's on your schedule coming up? What's coming up?
Um, it's pretty open. I'm trying to do more group exhibitions at the moment. I want to kind of like connect with other contemporary artists. So yeah, I'll be doing a couple of group exhibitions to close out the year, and then yeah, just more at the top of the year too. I think we have a project coming up in the works too. So yeah, just I don't have a solo exhibition on the horizon yet. I do have ideas for what maybe like the next two solo exhibitions might be, but I'm still in the early stages of making that work. So
Yeah, I've known you for years, and you strike me as someone who does sort of like take their time and not necessarily like rush into things. Um, and it's been interesting seeing your career evolve over these years as well. So I'm excited to have you be part of this show, along with all the other artists as well. So I mean, I guess just like one of the final questions I want to ask you is like, outside of art, like what do you enjoy doing? Like what are the other things that inspire you? Like we talked about film, we talked about reading, but like besides art,
yeah,
what are the other things that kind of get you going?
wow, that's I mean honestly, those are probably the main things. I do watch a lot of films, maybe too many, but yeah, and I've been reading a lot more because my studio is actually like a 45-minute commute from where I live. So I just found myself kind of like, uh, flipping through books on my commutes. Uh, I mean, I like sports. I'm a big Knicks fan, which has not been a great thing to say for most of my life, but they're playing well right now. So I'm really happy about that. Um, it's been a long time coming, but yeah, yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty like entrenched in visual art. When I'm not making work, I'm going to see exhibitions. You know, so yeah, because yeah, I would say that's my biggest interest, like going to see shows and seeing some of my favorite artists work. Learning from that.
Well, I appreciate your time today, Taj. I mean, it's been a great conversation. I learned things that I didn't know. I hope the people who joined us today, who will watch this in the future, also learn some things that they don't know. So, as I mentioned, your work's going to be featured in the upcoming exhibition at the Harvey B. Gantt Center. I'm excited to see it, excited to reconnect with you in person sometime soon as well. So I have final words that I'll get through, and we'll conclude today's session. So I want to just thank you again for your time. If there's anything you'd like to share before we go.
I just want to thank you, Dexter. Thanks a lot. This has been great.
No, my pleasure, man. My pleasure. Great conversation. So, the Gantt Center's goal is always to provide programs that inform and inspire. The support of viewers like you allows the Gantt to expand its reach and further develop programs like today's open air. You can lend your support to the Gantt Center by texting "Give to Gantt" to the number 91999. Also, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel for future programs and other video content updates. We want to thank you all for joining us for another wonderful conversation, and we look forward to next month's open air. Have a great evening. Bye bye.